sons of the soil. Some say that this Muslim majority enjoys special privileges, ranging from getting a government job, to a place at university, and even to getting lucrative business contracts. This is fueling the frustration of the minority Indian and Chinese communities. They say that as Malaysians, they should all be treated equally and fairly. And these racial tensions are dividing the society. Alok Devishant has the report.
The Prime Minister's office, Kuala Lumpur. These protesters are risking jail to voice their frustration at policies which they say favour Malaysia's majority.
We don't want any separations, we don't want any differences between the races, between everyone born on this land. We want justice. We are all Malaysians. We are born.
Those in this crowd believe Muslim Malays, known as Bumiputra or sons of the soil, enjoy privileges not extended to them. Discontent among Malaysia's Indian and Chinese minorities has been simmering since 1971, when the leading party, UMNO, brought in its new economic policy, or NEP. The government believed that an affirmative action policy was needed to help the Malay community.
The underlying reasons were economic reasons. Because there was a feeling that the Malays were marginalised.
But 36 years later, Indian families like the Muniandis say they're held back by a policy which favours Malays over other races.
We are not getting any special privileges from the government. We buy a house and the Malays buy a house. Why are they given a 7% discount when we poor Indians don't get any? They are human beings and we are human beings too. We are also Malaysian citizens just like them. But they are Bumiputras, prince of the soil. They are Bumiputras and we are merely citizens. I break down and cry thinking of our plight. Why are we being treated like this?
The Muniandi family believe this discrimination is already affecting the next generation. They say it is more difficult for non-Malay students to gain access to public universities.
Even if you score 10 A's, you won't get a place. Parents who have the money can send their children to private universities. But what about people like us? We don't have the money. What are we to do?
But the government insists that its policies provide a step up to families from all backgrounds, not just Malays.
I think it would be wrong to consider the NEP as purely a Bumiputra agenda. It is a national agenda. It must be seen as a national agenda. We've been quite scrupulously fair, in a sense, that we've tried to ensure that those non-Bumiputras also get what they want. Public universities, for example. We have departed from the quota system by and large. We've gone for a meritocracy system. And as a result of that, the non-Bumiputras have a larger share of entry into the public universities.
But critics argue that such changes are cosmetic and that the NEP allows ongoing discrimination.
This issue of race and how it manifests itself is clear. If you are Malay and if you are interested in securing loans from the government, you'll be given priority because you're a Malay. If you want to buy a house, the house is cheaper for you as opposed to a non-Malay. If you are applying for a job, you're given a priority because you are Malay as opposed to a non-Malay. If you have a situation whereby more than 90% of the civil service is made up of Malays, then it must be a product of some kind of discrimination. So it's actually the very fabric of the society is race-based.
The government says it is trying to recruit more non-Malays into the civil service, and that private sector firms, many of which are owned by Chinese Malaysians, should reciprocate.
We've stated openly we want more non-Malays to join the public service. But at the same time, you must appreciate there must be a sense of balance in this country. The private sector should also engage more Bumiputras. There is that also feeling amongst the Bumiputras that If the government is not there for them, they cannot survive.
In this climate of mutual mistrust, Malaysia's races remain deeply divided.
The state of affairs on racial integration among students is pathetic. You will see a group of Chinese on one side, you will see a group of Malays on one side, and then you have a small group of Indians on the other side. All talking their own languages and comfortable in their own languages. But you do not find any one group where there's some kind of interaction going on.
To address polarization of Malaysian society, the government launched a national service training scheme in 2003. The head of the scheme says a recent survey proves that it is succeeding in bringing young Malaysians closer together.
About 86% of the trainees, when they were interviewed, they all replied that national service training this program had brought them closer together in terms of interracial understanding, in terms of intercultural understanding.
But some argue that if these students are to enjoy a future free of distrust and division, their country must first deal with its past. Malaysia's race riots of 1969 still cast a long shadow over the country. The violent clashes between Malay and Chinese Malaysians claimed almost 200 lives. Decades later, the country remains deeply divided about what caused the riots.
It was triggered off by some of the demonstrations that were conducted by the opposition parties, during which they taunted the Malays. They were quite abusive of the Malays. That really set the Malays against them and triggered off the racial riots.
Dr. Kwa Kia Sung, the head of a Chinese higher education college, alleges that records kept by the British High Commission at the time raised serious doubts about the official history of the riots. Dr. Kwa says that the country would benefit from an independent investigation into what happened.
I think what is important is for there to be a national commission of inquiry and for there to be true national reconciliation in this country. I think that history of May 13 has to be put right and to bring to justice those who are responsible.
If it's going to be helpful, I would agree to it, but I don't think it would be helpful. I think the 13th May incident is something happened in the past. It is at the back of our minds, but for all Malaysians, I think we just really want to look forward. We don't want to look back.
The leading party, UMNO, argued that by reducing inequality between the races, the NEP would create a more harmonious society. However, some say that its benefits never reached the people who needed it the most.
UMNO hijacked the policy in order to meet its own demands for the country and to pursue its own interests in the country.
But Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, a prominent academic, says statistics prove that the NEP has significantly reduced poverty amongst Malays.
In 1969-70, 49.3% of the population lived below the poverty line. Today it is 5.8%. I think it is a stupendous achievement, which I think goes to show that the NEP had really reached ordinary people.
But Dr. Muzaffar argues that this could have been achieved without a policy which discriminates along ethnic lines.
They could have been more honest to the inspiration behind the goals of the NEP and said, we will not bring in ethnicity into the implementation of the NEP, but at the end of the day, you would have rectified the ethnic imbalances.
Dr. Muzaffar says removing that ethnic bias is difficult in a country where politics and race are so intertwined. In 2005, and again last year, UMNO Youth Wing leader Hishamuddin Hussain brandished a traditional Malay dagger, or a kris, at the leading party's General Assembly meeting. This has been interpreted as a threat, to anyone who questioned special rights for Malays.
What was he calling for by raising the race sheath? It was always to ward off any challenge to Malay power in this country.
And the question is, now since you have taken out the kris, what are you going to do with that kris? Who is your enemy here? A Chinese your enemy? Or Indians your enemy? Who is the enemy that you want to show this kris to?
I think he has been unfairly criticized because the kris is actually a social symbol for the Malays. It depicts a struggle. It doesn't necessarily be associated with violence.
For some Malaysians, the fear is that while race relations remain tense, there could be fresh outbreaks of violence. They cite several days of aggression in March 2001 as an example. 5 ethnic Indians were killed and scores were wounded, the vast majority Indian.
The attacker struck the temple chief first. He said, "They are slashing us, run for your life." I ran and later tripped and fell. That's when I felt something hit my back. I fainted after that. I can't remember my hand being slashed. I realized the injury only after I got up and started running again. I saw the 3 fingers dangling from my palm.
When he could not be present for work, the company told him to stop. He lost his job. Then we made the flower trade a permanent job. There was a time during this period when it was difficult to feed our children.
The government maintains that the violence was not racially motivated, but was provoked by Indian gangs operating in the area.
People are disturbed about the way they've undermined the local community, and they may take matters into their own hands. But it is actually reacting against people who commit crime. But because the gangs are Indians, then it's seen in a racial prism.
But others say that the majority of victims were ordinary people like V. Muniandi.
The attack on Indians took place on March 8, 2001. This is 2007 though. We have made representations to the Human Rights Commission. Not 1, not 2. We have made 5 complaints with the Human Rights Commission about setting up an inquiry on this issue. The Human Rights Commission refused to touch it.
We've not elevated it to the form of a national inquiry, but people who commit crime, they have to face the music, irrespective of whoever they are. If a Malay does something harmful to a non-Malay, we'll take action against him.
And yet, not one person is being convicted for murder following that violence.
It's a matter for the police, and they have to get evidence, but sometimes, as you know, evidence are hard to come by.
Even if the truth does come out, it may be too late for V. Muniandi.
There was a time I thought of migrating to India. I thought there was no use in us struggling like this. Especially after I was slashed. I thought they don't value us anymore. I told my family that we should just go back to India. We are on our own in this country. We have to struggle for survival. There is no one to help us.
After the break, corporate greed and mothers' needs in Indonesia.
Inspired by a true story.
Within these 4 walls, you can be straight.